we're sticking with VVIPs, although we are going to touch on ultra-long range. We're very pleased to have Paul-Franck returning from Comlux and Mark Butler from Aviation. They're going to take us through values of VVIP versus ultra-long range. I know Mark's also got a few slides to talk through as well. That's the clicker if you want. Paul needs no introduction. Long career in this industry in Airbus, Lilium and Comlux. Mark needs no introduction for anyone in Dubai, CEO of Aviation. So, Mark, what's happening with business jet values and the pre-owned market generally?
First of all, you never give an easy panel. Is this on? Oh, yeah. That's it? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you never give me an easy panel. They're always subjective, depending on people's experience of the last aircraft they purchased, or whether it was an expensive one or a cheap one. But I think generally, if you look at values across all models, they've certainly settled, and now I think they're just starting to descend. Values are starting to get a little bit lower and a little bit more palatable. But you'll see from some of the slides that we've got from the various different models that it isn't true of every aircraft. I can't really speak for ACJ because we don't do a huge amount, but on the Boeing side, it's a very difficult product to value because it's very dependent on the interior, the mechanics, the hours. A lot of people are not worried about the year like they would be with Gulfstream or Bombardier. It's more about the equipment level and what's installed, which will depict the value of the aircraft.
And the hours presumably don't make very few of them have flown anything like an airliner.
You're into the same position as when you're buying a used car. If you're buying a used car and it's done 40,000 miles and you only do 3,000 miles a year, 40,000 seems a lot. But actually the car will do 250,000 miles with pretty much no issues nowadays. The hours on ACJ, BBJ product is not so important as it is on Gulfstream and Bombardier products.
Paul-Franck, how would you describe the market?
Well, as long as we talk about the hours, I completely agree with Mark. There's a difference between an aircraft of like 10,000 hours on Airbus or Boeing. I don't think it counts much. However, if you start changing the engines, getting engines with 50,000 hours or more, then yes, the value drops a lot. But as Mark was saying, much less sensitive. In terms of value in general, I think it depends very much on the age of the aircraft. The experience that we have at Comlux is that, for example, the first 5 years on an ACJ, BBJ, it looks like the value drops quite a bit, mainly driven by the cabin, as Mark was saying, simply because Mr. Smith's cabin is not Mr. Brown's cabin. So if you want to sell it quick, then it's unlikely that your taste will match somebody else's taste, which is not the case for ultra-long range, which are much more fluid cabins, very similar. So the first 5 years, see a drop, but then after 5 years, the curve that we see is 2.5% in average. I would say very small, okay? And partly driven also by another factor, which I think is new since I came back in business aviation. Nowadays, I guess it's almost impossible to find a BBJ for less than 20 million for one funny reason. If you want to resell 2 engines with less than 10,000 hours, you'll get 10 million for each engine, and the BBJ is worth 20 million plus. So because an aircraft aged 20, 25 years is worth so much money, when you think about it, when those people bought the aircraft 20 years ago, they bought it for 60, 70 million, 20, 25 years later, is this worth 30% of the value? It's astonishing. It should be 5 to 10. So, as I said, it depends very much at what stage you sell your aircraft, I think.
And if you're marketing a BBJ to sell or an ACJ, is there anything you'd do differently for, say, a Gulfstream or a Falcon or a Bombardier?
Not really. I mean, for us, our specs are the same. We have more pictures, obviously, because it's a bigger cabin. But no, not really. We marketed them the same. I mean, you got to look at this not in terms of the size of the aircraft, but in terms of its value. You know, it's still only a $20 million jet. So, yeah, nothing different really. Not from our standpoint anyway. But we don't do any new aircraft. We only concentrate on the pre-owned market. But sorry, I was just going to say most of our requests are for 2000 to 2008 vintage BBJs. That's our most common sort of requested area.
I would have said yes, a big difference, but maybe because we're not exactly, maybe Action is a little bit more on Boeing, we're a little bit more on Airbus. I mean, we both like both manufacturers, but maybe a little bit more of this and that. As far as we're concerned, I would say, but I think this is maybe what you meant, Mark, like the cabin is a big topic. Anyone who sells an aircraft, it's about, okay, can I fly my critical mission? I have my house in Shannon and my beach house in Barbados. Can I fly this every month? Okay. Once you know that you can fly your critical mission, then the second thing is the cabin good for me? And back to my initial comment about the cabin. So this cabin thing is paramount in the discussion, whereas it is much less so on an ultra-long range. On an ultra-long range, if the customer is not happy, then change the carpet, make it bright, make it dark, whatever, and you change it. I'm overdoing it a bit, but the cabin, in my opinion, is a big topic. Depending on who you talk to, there could be some other topics like the size of the market. The size of the aircraft. You get rapidly into the topics of where do I park my aircraft, where do I hangar my aircraft. So those are considerations which I think are a bit specific. And the last one I would quote is the way you market. We know for the pre-owned market that we have listed aircraft, off-market aircraft. In this niche biz liners, in most cases, as far as we're concerned, it's an off-market sales practice, which makes it slightly different. Listed, usually it's based on price and speed, whereas off-market is the right aircraft, at the right time.
Yeah, well, effectively we're the same. But that's Action's general rule on everything, to be honest. We don't do much on market stuff. Most of our business is off-market aircraft. I think the point when you're selling large cabin aircraft like ACJs and BBJs is to highlight to the end buyer the differences in running costs between the two aircraft. Although hourlies and everything can be similar, parking and maintenance and everything else can be more expensive, but then crew training can be cheaper. So there are lots of different variables that need to be highlighted. Yes, the cabin does absolutely come into play a lot more, but when you're looking at an aircraft that's 2001, if you're looking at a Gulfstream that's 2001, you'd also have to do the cabin. It's just a variation in cost.
And time?
Time?
No.
After 5.
But doing a cabin takes a lot longer.
Oh yeah, of course. Depending on what you're doing to it. Depending on what you're doing. Most BBJs that we've sold have only really required minor stuff, carpet and a few leather touches. Because it's such a much wider cabin and much bigger cabin, we find there's a lot less damage to like veneers and stuff like that where people are dragging cases through. So a lot of the time you don't have to do that. But cabins are the thorn in everyone's side when it comes to big aircraft. The aircraft, the actual product itself is bulletproof. You know, it's an airliner. It's designed to be bounced down the runway by Ryanair, you know, or EasyJet with Airbus. But the cabin doesn't stand up so well all the time. And then, of course, you have the you know, the companies that go bust after they fitted a cabin, then you can't find the STC, and then you've got to go back and nightmare, absolute nightmare.
Yeah, which Brett touched on.
Yeah.
My perception is that it takes a lot longer to sell a VVIP airliner. Is that fair?
We're 5.5 months into a global, so no, from our standpoint.
Honestly, if you look at the statistics, there was a report from Amstat and another one for JetMed beginning of the year, talking about inventories, growth, etc. One of the topic was time on the market. And if I remember well, so time on the market are shrinking slightly, but still in the range of 250 days to sell any jet. Some of them are very fluid, some of them take long, but it's not that quick to sell any jet, I believe. As far as the ACJ, BBJs are concerned, in many cases, we don't have the ACJ or BBJ for sale. Like right now, for example, if somebody comes and say, Paul-Franck, Mark, I want an A320 corporate jet, very difficult to find. So you basically go see some owners and, you know, this one should be at the stage to sell and try to buy it back and sell. So this timeline is difficult to judge because it's from a very, very different ground. Overall, I would say probably a few more months, but not that much more, I would say.
And if you do market one, do you get more time wasters in the ACJ, BBJ market? Time wasters, like just people, flakier buyers?
There are a lot of time wasters out there. I don't think it's specific to each. We tend not to, if we get an ACJ or a BBJ, we tend not to market it. To be honest, there's always enough buyers that we know of that will take the aircraft. So we don't normally have to market. Sometimes we do from a strategic standpoint, but you know it's not required. There are so few options available. You know, you can go out and pick any G650. There are the 15, 20 available, but like we're saying, there are just not that many options in ACJ or BBJ. So normally you have a line of people sort of, you know, if you find one, let me know, I'm interested. And that's kind of how we end up doing it. But so we often make also better margins across the wider body aircraft as well, which is all we're interested in, if I'm completely honest.
How do you price one? If someone says, you know, I want to buy X, or I want to, you know, you've told us the base figure is the engine value, which is interesting. But, you know, if I've got a 6-year-old BBJ with an absolutely horrible interior, you know, orange and purple seats.
Porn star.
Porn star.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah. How would you value it?
Carefully.
I'd like to say that I've seen some very ugly Gulfstreams and Dassault as well, so I'm not sure it's specific to the ACJs or BBJs. I remember one 550, which will be soon in the market. When I saw the picture, I said, wow, some people have different tastes, obviously. And this one will be difficult to sell, I can guarantee. But you're right, on a fully customized ACJ or BBJ, some cabins are different, you know, fancy, and more difficult to sell. So for those, it's a little bit what I was saying at the beginning, but of course, the fancier, the more difficult, and some of them are difficult to sell, really difficult to sell.
But how do you go to the owner who's chosen it, thinks it's the most beautiful aircraft in the world, and, you know, is emotionally involved? How do you say, you know, you've
ruined your aircraft? Yeah, there's no way but to be brutally honest. You know, I remember years ago, we were looking at Lewis Hamilton's Challenger, and it was black on the outside with a red stripe, black and red leather inside with black carbon fiber and black carpet with a black headliner. And it was horrendous. I mean, it was really bad. There is no choice. Painting an aircraft is a piece of cake. That's easy. The interior change is just too difficult. So you have to be brutally honest and say, look, you know, I'm sorry, but your aircraft is worth X because of this. The idea is actually that you would go back to that customer with a solution. So, you know, you go back with a cabin change as economically as possible, trying to salvage as much as you can, but also tone it down a bit. And I think it depends on how much wealth the end buyer has. When they bought that aircraft brand new from the manufacturer, if they're incredibly wealthy and they really don't care, then they'll have whatever interior they like. They just need to be educated that if they're conscious of the return price, then they need to be educated that it might not reach full value potential because of the selected options. I mean, that's all you can do.
Yeah, well, you try to be as nice as you can, right? Mr. Customer, as you know, many other customers are very boring compared to you, and we'll have to standardize this cabin much more. Probably cost 20 million. Yeah? I completely concur. What can you do?
What do you do if it's really horrible and Comlux completed it?
Well, in this case, you don't take it under mandate. You know you struggle. You don't want to struggle.
How easy is it to find someone who can do a small completion? You know, if I've bought a horrible aircraft, I'm selling a horrible aircraft, or I've bought one. How easy is it to find a completion slot?
Yeah. I have a joker, so it's more for you, right?
Okay. Well, I was going to say mine might be a joke too, but if you can find someone immediately to do a cabin mod on an aircraft, they're normally going to be crap. If you have to wait, then you're waiting for a good service center. If it's like, you know, in a world of house modifications, you were talking about kitchens. If you can find a plumber tomorrow, likelihood is he's not very good. But if the plumber says I'm a month out because I'm busy, then he's a good guy. It's exactly the same with the cabin stuff.
So I think we're talking about exceptions here, and not that many aircraft are horrible, as you say, Al.
No, but just maybe a tired interior.
Yeah. It could be like strange colors and stuff like that. As far as we're concerned at Comlux, we are lucky enough to have our own completion center, and usually we sell this asset as a unique selling point. I would say, look, let's figure out the time and cost, etc. We'll have it all under control, so you're better off with us when there's a lot of changes on the cabin. But I would say more generally, you want to propose the aircraft with a certain layout to a customer who's likely to like it. Otherwise, people will think you're nuts. So it's more than anything else.
Normally, it's personal touches. So generally, if you sell a customer an aircraft and you identify a facility to take the aircraft to that's an 8 or 9 month lead time until they can get it in, most customers are quite happy using the aircraft for that period. And actually what we end up doing is we tie it into a 144 or, we tie it into a big check, and then it's less inconvenience for the end customer.
Maybe the other way around. If you have a cabin which is much more appealing and much more, I would say, standard. For example, we've sold 6 Airbus A220s, 2 of which are in operation and a third one coming in operation in a few weeks. Well, those 2 aircraft, for example, the charter market, are extremely successful. They fly a lot. The prices are even higher than the 320s, BBJ2, BBJ MAX 8 on the market. It's amazing. Why? Because the cabin is likable for much more people. That's why. So we try to guide customers through this. And as Mark says, if people really want to, give the money on a super customized cabin, then be it.
Yeah.
We've just had this is the 5th session looking at VVIP, and we've had, you guys saying they hardly depreciate. We had the operators saying they're cheaper to operate.
Well, they hardly depreciate towards the end of their life.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, they depreciate as well as a business jet, or better.
Yeah.
The operators saying how great they are to operate. Why are there still so few of them?
Well,
nice question now.
No, but the initial cost is substantial. Whether you buy an asset worth 50 million or double or more, it's a different investment. You see what I mean? There are less people likely. Same for cars. I'm not too much in cars, but when I see some guys spending 2 million on a car, I think they're out of their mind. I can buy for 50K, I get almost the same. I guess it's something similar. Price elasticity, I guess, plays a lot. And maybe another aspect is in some regions, you don't want to be seen with a big aircraft like that.
They're far more attractive now, being pre-owned 10, 15, 20 years old than they are when they're brand new, certainly for the big stuff.
And you've got a fancy car. I've seen it.
However, I'd like to say a caveat to what I just said. If you look at the Airbus 220 EcoProjet, I think that they managed to have like a product which is halfway between an ultra-long range and regular ACJ, BBJ. It might be that this aircraft will catch up much more. Like the wingspan is very similar to a Bombardier or Gulfstream. The hangar space, the parking space, runway performance, so many things are so similar. Let's see how this evolves over time.
Except it won't, because there aren't that many 220 slots available.
I hope. As we saw earlier from Airbus, you're right, the waiting list is painful right now. The day they accept to produce more might be that they are much more on the market. Right now, Bombardier and Gulfstream, they have a volume effect. And the aircraft is so much easier. When I talk about the ACJ 220 to customers, most times, it's the first time they hear about it. So that's probably a big reason, scarcity and unknown on the market yet. But let's see over time.
But Airbus isn't going to produce 50 ACJ 220s a year.
No.
Probably not. I hope they make more margin on the ACJ. That's what I heard. Why not? Why not? If I were in their position, I worked on the airline market for many years, and I worked in business aviation many years as well. I'm French.
I'd guessed.
Okay. And we French, we hate to choose between dessert and cheese. We get both, I don't see why Airbus would choose between ACJ and airliners. I don't get it. Both are great. Let's get them both. Plus, they're French. I understand even less.
But I think you look at the, Vincent mentioned, you look at the lead times on, the backlogs they have with airlines. They're not going to be able to, they physically can't add the production to make this ever compete with the Bombardier or the Gulfstream aircraft.
I think one thing to make note of as well is now that the Gulfstreams are getting bigger and the Globals are getting bigger, actually when you look at parking spaces on a ramp, they're almost the same. The difference obviously is in the cost of the aircraft right from the get-go, with the interiors completion cost being much higher on an airline body to a degree. But I think that we will start to see more wide body sales as the other manufacturers catch up. Originally, when in 2001, and you were looking at G5s G450s or you know, Global Express, something like that, the BBJ and ACJ product were much bigger. So it was a bigger step. Now the gap is closing, for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. It's interesting to note that exactly what Mark was saying. There used to be two segments totally apart. Now there is this 220 in the middle, and the cabins of the ULRs are grown so much. It's very impressive. They still have the size of a 220, but they've grown so much. It's so impressive. So soon, I guess, there will be, like, the gap is smaller and smaller, which will look like the segment is not a segment which is far off. It's a segment which is so much closer. Then you can switch. Before that, you couldn't switch. You had to choose. Soon, you can probably switch from one aircraft to another. So let's see. If Airbus and Boeing, if it were my money, I would probably want to sell more ACJs and BBJs. But
Yeah, at list price rather than Ryanair prices or Qatar. Mark, did you want to go through your slides quickly for values?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of covered it, really.
We have, but they're loading. I think, can we get the slides up? Also, if you had, in the sweepstake, if you had Paul-Franck mentioning the word 220 50 times.
Yeah. He loves that product. Yeah, I mean, the first few slides here are just to get a comparison of other models in the market. This was done from 2018. Blue, you've got average retail and wholesale, and this was obviously taken from industry documents, various different sources, and averaged out. Let me get to. So when you look at 650, you can obviously see now, obviously, it's starting to flatten. The interesting one comes when you look at legacy. Absolutely crazy. If only we'd known in 21 to go out and buy a load of legacies. And the same with 604. I'd be sat on a beach right now and not in here. But prices generally are starting to come down and be a little bit more reasonable. But I think 604s and legacies are still massively overpriced for what they are. And then you have data from 319. I'm not sure how accurate this is. I don't have a gauge. But again, this was taken from the sources. And BBJ. Now, again, you've got to take into account, I mean, our own BBJ, we purchased 2 years ago now, did paint the interior, and effectively there are people offering $4 or $5 million more for it now than what we paid for it in 22. So you've got to take ACJ and BBJ prices with a pinch of salt, because it is very much dependent on what the aircraft looks like, what the interior is like, etc. And ultimately what someone's willing to pay. It's not as easy as just going out and using the same ingredients that you would do to value a G650. You really have to be very specific on the spec and the aircraft itself.
Is it correlated with the wider market, roughly? So if, ultra long range aircraft fall significantly, you'd expect ACJ or BBJ prices to fall, or is it a separate market?
No, I think it's separate. I think they kind of run on their own. I think ACJ were traditionally stronger priced. They used to hold their money stronger than Boeing. But I think now in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I think that's come around. Probably because of the lack of ACJs available. I don't know if the initial acquisition price was much higher for the ACJ product. But now, we're not finding much drop on the Boeings at all, not from what we're looking for.
What's the final piece of advice you would give to someone looking for a pre-owned or a new airliner?
Okay, so for bizliners, I think you probably have two sort of buyers. The buyers, the emotional buyer, I want this cabin, etc. And the price always matters, but less. And some others are very mindful of residual values and life cycle costs and what have you. So those are, I think, two very different kind of customers. To the first one, you look for the right aircraft, what I was saying before. The second one, I would always recommend pick a relatively standard cabin. Your residual will be always better. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a ACJ, BBJ buyer, then they're very different. So not in terms of those two particular buyers, but we don't get many G650 people looking at a BBJ or an ACJ. It's Marmite. You want a wide body and the slower performance and the lower altitude, and or you want the fast Ferrari. There are two separate buyers. The people that we get, particularly, they come in looking for the wide body. They normally know whether they want BBJ or ACJ, and they're very hard to sway one or the other. So I think you have to just follow the lead of the customer and see what they want. It's your job then to identify the right vintage, the right spec, the right aircraft, and with all the tanks, and obviously you need to find out the requirements as to what distances they're doing and how many people they're carrying, and whether it's private or commercial ops or
And finally, would you advise them to charter the aircraft if they wanted to? Charter it out?
If they don't need the money, then don't bother. If they want a little bit of extra income, then yes, charter. It's totally dependent on the end customer and whether they want. It's not a case of damage anymore either, because aircraft now are better looked after and respected by people than they were maybe 10 years ago, where you get people drawing on seats and stuff. I don't see that. I'm not massively in the charter world, so I don't know for sure. But some people just don't want strangers in their second home or fifth home, if you like.
Yeah, so as far as we're concerned, we charter a lot, like more than half of the fleet is chartered. And when I looked at the numbers from a P&L standpoint between regular business jets and bizliners, the charter profit for the owner, like the return for the owner on a bizliner, is massively higher. So if you are to as Mark said, it depends very much. Some people want, some people don't. But if you are to charter your aircraft, you're better off chartering your bizliners. Your return will be so much higher. Simply for, you charter it for more, and usually your operational cost is less. So of course, what remains in the middle is much better.
And talking about margins, Mark mentioned that the margins on selling ACJs can be great. And he's donated all of his last deal to the networking reception now, which is outside. So thank you so much to every speaker today. Thanks very much to Paul-Franck from Comlux, Mark Butler for Action Aviation. Drinks will be outside in a second, or they're there now. Please take your any belongings with you, because the Dealmakers Dinner, sponsored by AIC Global Solutions, Airbus Corporate Jets, and Deus XPay will be in here. So please take your stuff, and thanks very much to Mark for the drinks outside. Thank you.